itself, but actually only have one slide for this evening, and that's it. We are in Hebrews chapter 11. Hebrews chapter 11 is known as the Hall of Fame of Faith, or there's several sayings of that. Basically, it talks about the great people in the past, in the Hebrews, actually before the Hebrews too, that had great faith. So we're going to look at that today. The wonderful thing about this, it continues on the whole theme of Hebrews that I've been talking about. You know, we started it out. The writer was, he's making his argument all the way through, and you can see it from chapter to chapter where it's talking about Jesus is better, Jesus is better, Jesus is better. Now he's covered the new covenant has surpassed the old covenant. It's gone away. Remember, he's talking to Hebrews. It was huge. But if the words he's talking and the arguments that he is making are very clear, very precise, good stuff. But I want you to not forget the whole overarching way the writer goes about his, and I say argument, or defense may be a better word, of the truth. So, because that's something that we can model when we are dealing or talking with people in the world today on not only biblical subjects, but technically any subject. It's a beautiful example of that, of how you defend a position. And this is that next step of it again. Now we're closing out. Next week may be the last week in Hebrews. But we're starting out 11 here. And what we've just left is how Christ's sacrifice, that was all that was needed. Once and for all, it's done. And he talks about in the end of chapter 10, he's calling them to persevere in faith. Just as a reminder, it was Langton, Archbishop Langton in the mid-1200s, 1250s, somewhere in there, that added the chapter breaks in here. So though chapter 10's there was never a real break there. So what we see is the writer saying Christ's sacrifice in the beginning of 10 is once and for all. It's been done. Now persevere in the latter part of 10, and he hits them in 11 when he comes in and says, you need to persevere just like all these people you know about persevered. See, he's telling them, persevere just like all these people. Who are the people he's talking about? Let's read chapter 11. It starts out, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. This is what the ancients were commended for. And I'm just going to tell you, when I'm reading through this here, if I say commanded instead of commended, you know what I mean, because I've been stumbling over that all week when I've been reading myself. No, commended. So, yeah, here we go. It starts out in verse 3. He says, by faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen was not made out of what was visible. In other words, nothing can't create something. And it goes on to, and it says, by faith Abel brought God a better offering than Cain did. By faith he was commended as righteous when God spoke well of his offering, and by faith Abel still speaks even though he died. Basically what you're going to see here, he's kind of walking through Genesis That was Genesis 4. And then it goes on, by faith, Enoch was taken from this life, so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, he built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he commended the world and became heir of the righteousness. He condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. Think about how long he was faithful. How long did Noah preach to the people that wouldn't listen to him? While he was building the ark? 100 years. I mean, he was faithful for a long time. And it goes on, we pick back up in verse 8, it says, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, he obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. How often recently through here and through the sermons and stuff have we been hitting that point, looking forward? You know, we face a lot of things right now, and quite frankly, it's something that we all stumble on. We always look at what's around us. We don't look 20 years ahead or 30 years ahead, or let's be honest with you, heaven most of the time. Maybe some of us do. You know, like I tell Paul, I said, yeah, don't worry about that right now. You know, for a teenager, it's hard not to worry about the right now. You know, and it's like most. You know, it's everything is what's going on right now. You know, don't worry about those guys or this or whatever, because you know what? 20 years from now, you're going to be like, man, I'm so glad I'm not a teenager anymore. I think it's like 99% of us in here would say, you know, because, well, it's tough. But we get our focus off. As I digress, I'm sorry. Like I just got my focus off of this. Picking back up in verse 11. And by faith, even Sarah, who was past childbearing age, was enabled to bear children because she considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and he as good as dead, came the descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. That's something we need to remember. We may be Americans, but if we're Christians, you know, we're really called out to be different, right? Where is our home going to be? It's going to be in heaven. That's what we need to remember. Because there's plenty of stuff going on in this country, and there always has been, but there's plenty of stuff going on in this country to get you down. If you don't believe me, turn on the news. Or open Facebook or something. Because there's so much stuff. We need to focus on heaven. And therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, I've been mentioned to point where these things out, but we've gone from Genesis chapter 4 now to Genesis chapter 22. And it says, by faith Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He whom had embraced the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, it is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. Abraham reasoned that God could ever even raise the dead, and so in a manner of speaking, he did receive Isaac back from death. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in the regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. By faith, Moses, and that's basically the end of Genesis, moving into Exodus now. It says, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as a greater value than the treasures of Egypt because he was looking ahead. Again, looking ahead to his reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who was invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and the application of blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. But when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days. By faith, the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. He could have also said, and went on to be in the lineage of Jesus Christ. And what more shall I say? I don't have time to tell you about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, and David, and Samuel, and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised. Who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned into strength. Isn't that a great statement there? These people's weaknesses were turned into strength. What else is he saying there? He's saying all these people had such great faith. We're kind of, I don't want to say, he's kind of saying, look up to them in that regard. But he's saying they were human too. He's saying they had weaknesses. These weren't some people that we can't be like. They were people, just like we're people. I think I love that the weakness being pointed out there because it reminds us we're capable of having the same faith. Glasses on. And whose weaknesses was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Verse 35 here, just back where we were there. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. There were others who were tortured, refusing to be released so that they might gain an even better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were put to death by stoning. They were sawed in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in sheepskin and goatskin and destitute, persecuted and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains, living in caves and in holes in the ground. They were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised, since God had planned something better for us so that only together with us they would be made perfect in Jesus Christ. Remember, Christ's blood flows forward and backwards as well. And before we jump, I am going to cover the first part of 12 there real quick, but I wrote up on the board who. And for those online, it's actually the word who, not, who's on first. You know what I mean? Here is the writer. He's just told them that about the new covenant. He's reminding them about this stuff. These were Christians he was writing them to that were previously Jewish people. They were converts. And he says, remain faithful. There have been people that have gone through so much and remained faithful. That's what you need to do. And then he goes off to list them. Any good Jewish person is going to know all about the people he talked about. Then he talked about the people that we don't necessarily know any names for. People that were persecuted, beat, assaulted too. There was some bad stuff happening to these people. And he said, and yet they remained faithful. He's saying, you need to do it. Don't forget all these people that have done it before you. It can be done. Now, my question to you is, when you think of somebody that's remained faithful, who is it? Is it maybe somebody from the Bible, or is it somebody that you know? Maybe a parent or a grandparent, maybe even a great-grandparent. I meant to write 2 states up there. I meant to write Colorado and Texas. There have been a couple instances in my life where I've been like, wow, how? Was my first thought. Not to bring up the tragedy at Columbine, but there was a young lady there when the gunman walked in the room, asked who's a Christian. And she stood up. Told him to stand up, and she stood up, and he killed her. Wow. In Texas, the trial a couple of weeks ago, there was a gentleman, I'm horrible with names, as most of you have figured out by now, but a lady police officer came home from a shift, went into a man's apartment that she thought was hers, but it was not her apartment, and she shot him and killed him. And he actually was a song leader at Church of Christ there in Houston. And there was a little bit of a scandal about it because the judge actually gave the police officer a hug after she'd been sentenced to prison. But it was only after the person she killed brother came forward, forgave her publicly, told her he would be praying for her, and asked if he, in fact, could give her a hug as well. Man, I hope I can do those things. I hope I don't have to be honest. Wow. Are there people that you know or instances you're aware of where people did something through faith that made you go, wow, incredible? We don't necessarily have to look at the Hall of Fame of Faith to see people acting in faith day in and day out. It can be people we know as well. Quite frankly, there's people that, let's be honest, on a Sunday morning, there's people, every Sunday morning, there's people that struggle to get here to church. Let's be honest, it's hard for some people, and yet they do it. That's another example. There's examples everywhere if we look for them. And I challenge you this week to think about that a little bit. Think about people that you know that are faithful. And you maybe have thought at one time, wow, how do they continue to do that? Or how did they do that? Or have you thought, I hope if the circumstances ever arise, I can be as faithful and forgiving. The brother forgiving the lady, that's being faithful as well. We are all called to forgive. His whole family was devastated by that. And he spoke up for the family and set an incredible example and made it to national news. Instead of the ever ongoing fighting, bitterness, hatred, and everything else this world throws at us day in, day out. Those two people I remember very clearly being a light. Who's your light? Not trying to be down here. Y'all are like, but who's your light? Who's your light? Think about it. And with that, I am going to pick up and read the first little bit here of 12. Because remember, these things have been broken up by artificial chapters being put in. It says in 11:40, since God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they have been made perfect. Therefore, there's always that therefore. That I've said this, now I'm saying something else. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that is so easily entangled. He's saying let's get rid of anything that holds us back. Let's get rid of the sin. Let's make our minds up. This is what we're going to do, and let's get rid of all the stuff we need to get rid of. And let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. When you run a race, let me ask you, has anybody ever seen a race that there was no course set out for? This is a 26.2 mile marathon. Y'all go run somewhere and come back and, let us know how you did. That ain't crazy. The race set out before them, the finish line is remaining faithful, going to heaven. So that's what they're talking about here. It says, and I'm going to read that again, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such oppositions from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. All of this. Remember these people. Remember what Christ did. The very last part here. So that you will not grow weary and lose heart. That's why he wants them to remember these people. Remember the people who have been faithful to help you be faithful. To help all of us to be faithful. With that, we're going to close out for tonight. I very well may finish up Hebrews next week, and then we'll move on to something else. But when you get a chance, thumb through Hebrews and look at that argument, the defense the writer laid out in Hebrews. It's done so beautifully. And it's something you can look at as well for the defense of any position. One position has these points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He goes through and addresses each point and then corrects with the truth each point and builds one to the next, to the next, to the next to get where we are. It's great. I hope y'all like it as much as I do. With that, everybody online, bye. Juanita, Trent, Chloe, I don't know how many or whatever, but we'll see y'all later.